James, he said, "You're James and I'm Paul." I said, "Well, your name is Ernest, but I'll go with that." And he was talking about different approaches. And he said, "But you know what? I like everything James says, and I like everything Paul says, and I love the Bible, even the mistakes. They're all wonderful." And I knew what he was saying. Obviously, that upsets people, but to me, I just think of it as real history. I don't want a book that someone came in from and I get emails. I'm sure some of you have seen these things where someone says, "Oh, in Jordan, there's these golden tablets and, they want to sell them and they claim that it's this and that." And, oh, letter of Pontius Pilate. Did you know there's a letter of Pontius Pilate where he wrote about the death of Jesus? And there's a Gospel of Joseph of Arimathea. As soon as you hear it, you go, no, no,
Hmm.
no. Now, if there was a tradition of different copies and redactions with some early copies, we might take a look at it. But all that stuff is, you probably saw that thing on, if you get Bible History Daily, which I highly recommend, it's free at the BAR website, BAS, Biblical Archaeology Society. They had a thing about this infancy gospel's been found and it's deciphered now. And we already have versions of it. And it's just crazy stuff, about Jesus making clay birds and going, woo, and they all fly away, or knocking a kid dead just because the kid bumped him. And, it's like, okay, we need more of that kind of thing. It's not real.
Yeah.
I kind of found the Pontius Pilate to be quite fascinating, actually.
It's fascinating, but it's
Yeah.
just, I think it really is a forgery. I mean, I
Really?
don't, oh yeah, oh yeah. But you got to always ask. A lot of times it's a text that we don't have the original of, but somebody made a transcription. And you go, oh, really? Okay. So you can't look at it or examine it. That's the problem with the Shapiro School,
Yeah.
Mm.
but not for long.
That's right.
Okay, Ross, you take over.
All right. Well, I mean, you got us started well. I don't know what we missed at first, James, but I did when I came on. You were talking about the similarity in this method, using this method
Ah,
with the Torah sources and the gospel sources. I really think that by using that method, I mean, I think we see a lot of things like I had never noticed before I put these charts together. I started doing this in like 2022. And once I did that, then I started noticing not only do we have stories that have similar material, but it's a consistent arrangement of the material, like I tried to show in this chart. Now, you would not normally connect like in this chart. Let me go to one that was actually a surprise to me, and I think it's on the burden of leadership. And it's one thing to notice, like in Exodus, where you have Jethro is clearly part of the story, whereas he's not mentioned at all in Deuteronomy in this story. But Jethro is the one who advises Moses, this is the way you ought to do it, and he accepts it. But so initially, my comparison was just that in Exodus's account, or the account of Exodus, Jethro gets the nod on it was his idea. Deuteronomy, Moses just says, "Yeah, it was this idea." He doesn't mention. Well, that was not the thing that surprised me. What surprised me was then finding in Numbers 11 that the leadership would be shared, and it had to do. The burden of this people was alleviated by the falling of the Spirit. You see, Numbers, interestingly enough, Bamidbar talks more about the Spirit than you find in Exodus or Deuteronomy. The God of the spirits of all flesh, that language, James and I talk about that verse. Really a nice verse, but you're not going to find that kind of language in Exodus or Deuteronomy. It's more of what we find in Numbers. But I do think that it is very interesting when we look at this chart, and I hope that we have some questions based on this chart. or on anything that we covered in the class. There are people who get very uncomfortable, and I almost understand if they approach this like, well, if they're unsure about what I'm saying, I get that they might be a little bit nervous. But when you start lining these up and it lines up this well, I really don't see what the problem is. It's clearly we have different sources. So, Carolyn, all the way from France, how are you today? Shabbat Shalom, Carolyn.
Shabbat Shalom, Ross. I'm just fine. I would like to talk about what Miriam brought up about how we can know when the scribes started adding to or taking away, when they became the lying pen. And one of the things that you mentioned today was the fact that it was the elders of Israel and the priests who had charge of the scroll. Well, if that's the case, that's a perfect opportunity to buy and sell indulgences like we find in the Catholic Church. That's a perfect way to extort the people. And who's going to know? Because all you have to say is, God said it like this. Well, we can't check it. We don't have access to the source. When can we know that that sort of thing began to occur? If it did, can we pinpoint when?
It is a good question. The only thing we can do to even approach finding an answer is to, in my opinion, and we may have other opinions out there, but I'll say it this way. What we have is we have all sorts of text. We have the Masoretic text, and typically people of faith have that is their main text. And I have a lot of those behind me. A lot of translations are based on the Masoretic text. Different versions of the Masoretic text, I might say. A little bit longer answer than maybe what you were looking for, but let me say it this way. I love, and even this week recommended, I think it was to Charles, because he was looking for a Bible with the white spaces. I love the Jerusalem Bible, the Koran Jerusalem Bible, because it has Hebrew on one side and English on the other. It's a very literal translation, and it shows the breaks in the Hebrew and the English. You can follow along this system. Now, the thing about that is, and I've only learned this recently, is that Bible, that translation is based on Masoretic text, yes, but not even some of the earliest manuscripts. In fact, we now know that that's based on some later manuscripts. So I wanted to look at what are the earliest manuscripts. And I know that people often say, well, older or earlier doesn't necessarily mean more accurate. That I would agree with to some degree, but man, the reason we love the Dead Sea Scrolls is because those are early examples of these texts that we love. The Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch. When I ask the question from my personal study, what is the original reading or what is the earliest reading? I look at all these sources and try to pinpoint. We can't really tell like a date, like when it went off the rails. But what I want to try to figure out is what did the Bible look like in certain stages? I'm going to let James go and then I'll come back to it. James, go ahead. You got to unmute. I know you know that, but
Can you let me share the screen real quick, Russ?
yeah, let me make sure I've got that authorization there.
Okay.
Hold on.
I just put a link in the comments. This is a scan of the intro to Friedman's book, not how he got the Bible.
You should be able to do it.
Okay, not how he got the Bible, but the Bible, the sources revealed. And I'm going to share it just with this group because, I don't want to copy his book and send it, but here's what I want to show you. This is my copy. It's marked. I just uploaded it. You can all download it. This will change your life. This will rock your world, and you'll be delighted with it because he gives an overview So start out with this, and then seven main arguments for
Yeah.
sources. And somebody had said, Thomas had said, well, who uses Horeb and who uses Sinai and things like that. And I'm not going to summarize all this. You can download
Yeah.
it and read it. You're going to have so much fun. Okay, look at this terminology. The mountain that is called Sinai in J and P 20 times is called Horeb in E and D 14 times. In 34 occurrences of these names, there's no exception. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You go through and you see all these from the words, on the basis of the words, in connection to the words. We learned that from Moshe Gabori. We never met him, but his son Ross and I knew well, and it was passed on to us from David Horitz. Now look at the end. You go through all these things. It's the most wonderful thing. I wish I had this for the New Testament. I need to write this for the New Testament.
Yeah, you do. Yeah,
I
you do.
do. So look, you go to the bottom, and here's what he says. I think this is the end. Yeah. You know how people say, oh, well, they've studied the documentary hypothesis. It's got all these problems in it. And somewhere here, I think, he says, no one I think, whether one agrees, questions, challenges one will have in front of him or her, thank you,
Hmm.
for the evidence to address. Look at this. It is amazing that at this point, when such a massive evidence is available, some writers still discuss that at so low a level, for example, arguing for whether the different names of God constitute proof or not. Ross and I have a really good friend. He's a filmmaker. I'm not going to say his name. You can guess it. Pretty conservative. And we were talking to him about this once, and he goes, yeah, but here's a verse, and it has Yod He Vav He and Elohim in the same. It's like, duh, like you seriously
Yeah.
think that was never noticed? What needs to be noticed is where is that? And you're going to find that usually it's the redactor putting together two things and so forth. Anyway, and he basically says that nobody, uh, he meets people all the time that's, oh, I don't agree with that. And they literally don't know any of this. And look how he's just pointing it out one by one. Look
Yeah.
at this. You can study forever, and it's so fascinating. And it doesn't mean, look, the hypothesis has been refined considerably since the 1830s. Even Shapira began to, read some of that. Anyway, so you can all have that, and just this group, though, because, it is his book.
Yeah.
But it's going to make you go buy the book because the book itself then has all those sources in different fonts. So you've just got the Torah with all those sources and it's in different fonts. See, once you get used to the fonts, you can just open it up anywhere.
Yeah.
Leviticus 18, and like, well, what's the source? It changed my life. It changed my life.
And I would agree, James. I would just piggyback off of that. When I first read who wrote the Bible, it didn't really shake my faith. It inspired me to dig deeper because I thought now for the first time, some of these questions that I've had began to make sense. And what I find so often, James alluded to, is people tend to be very critical of the scholarly view, biblical scholarship. And we've talked about this before, but I want to give you a different example. A lot of people, all of you here today, have studied the Bible your whole life, and you're very invested in it, and you know it really well. And we tend to be a little bit, let me speak for myself, we might think, well, what could a scholarship offer that the Holy Spirit hadn't given me? I know this material because I've been studying the Bible my whole life. And yet most of us would at least consider the recommendations or advice of a doctor of medicine. I'm not saying that every one of you would. Some of you might not use medical doctors either. My son is a medical doctor. But my point is that, like, I would never tell James Tabor or anyone who has a PhD in these schools, I wouldn't dismiss what they say. I don't necessarily have to accept everything that a scholar, a theological scholar, comes up with, but I certainly need to consider it. And what I want you to know is that this idea, I hear it all the time. James gave the example. People typically, their understanding of JEPD is J uses a divine name, E does not use a divine name. Let me just take that one little piece. And so they find a text that is considered E, and it has the name Jehovah, and they go, look, these stupid scholars. But let me tell you, just so you know, this one simple but important distinguishing point. E uses the name Jehovah a lot. Ready? You ready for this? It uses it a lot. But you know what E doesn't do? E does not use the name before it's introduced in E. Now, I know some of you aren't familiar with this, but this is a very important point. In Exodus chapter 6, God meets Moses and he tells Moses, look, by my name, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, I was known to the fathers by my name El Shaddai. Now, I'm just paraphrasing this, but that's what it says. So what E does is there are E texts, if you'll allow me to use that term, the Elohist text begins before Exodus 6. But all of those texts which are identified as E prior to Exodus 6 don't use the name. But once you know the name in E, it's used. Okay, now one more point. Eric, I'm going to get to you in 1 second, my brother. One thing that's really important in what I've tried to show in my teaching, because a lot of times people get really anxious or nervous or concerned when you say, I'm going to talk about the documentary hypothesis or whatever. So what I've made it a practice to try to do is to help my friends and fellow lovers of God and the Bible to see some of these valuable tools by showing you what goes underneath these designations. Example, you have what we call episodes or sources, and let's say a story, there might be 2 stories of the flood that made it into the biblical text. One is E, one is J. We have duplicates, we have some of these stories are in triplicate. And what scholars began to notice way back in the 1800s in particular, really a little bit before that, but when you get to people like Groff and Wellhausen, what they began to notice was that they have different stories told slightly differently, and that was the first level of discovery. And then they said, hey, wait a minute. These 2 different stories, 2 different versions of the same story, one uses Jehovah and the other uses Elohim. That's when they began to notice that you had a Jehovah, a J source, and an E source. I really think that this group in particular could use and would appreciate a good class on the documentary hypothesis, a series that we could put together and take it slow, and we could introduce the material. Like James said, I hear people all the time, and he does as well, that they say, well, that's just that scholar stuff, and I don't buy those liberal, non-believing, atheistic, whatever. But if you read, I love this where Friedman, he says, if you want to argue, that's fine, but answer these 13 key points that are demonstrated hundreds of times in the text. It is the most rewarding study of my life. Like, as a New Testament scholar, if I called James and I said, James, look, I know that a lot of scholars believe that Mark is the first gospel, but I just don't buy that. And I've got my own theory. Well, James, because he's nice, would probably say, well, it's pretty well established. I mean, he'd answer me nicely, but I know in his head he would be saying, you're not addressing any of the last 200 plus years where we have worked this out in discussions. There is proof, there's evidence. Well, it's the same thing with the Hebrew Bible, and we have to get over some of the fundamentalist views that have led us down the wrong path. Carolyn, I'm coming back to your question shortly because I know you and Miriam had a question. I think
Thank you.
it deserves a little bit more conversation, but just wanted to let you know. Eric, good morning. Let me bring you on before you forget what you were going to ask.
Well, I had to write it down. Just no, it going along with what you've been saying, not formerly, which was brought up by the other lady, the ladies over there. This in my life played out pretty recently, so I can kind of address it in my first person. Is when my faith was very young, it was very weak. Now that I can look back upon it and where I am now, and the documentary theory hypothesis was terribly disconcerting, very upsetting to even think about, and was totally dismissed, just like you said.
Yeah.
But as I grow in my faith over the last 24 years, whatever, I can start seeing all of this making sense because as the apostles asked our Father, please increase our faith. And if you're growing in your faith, then you can live on that and not on what you're being preached at out of the version that you're reading or the pulpit.
Yeah.
So it's very understandable to me where people will reject that stuff at first. And the way that you present it, and James and others, makes it so once you get to this point, and however you find this site or that book, then all of a sudden it starts opening up your world, and I think it grows your faith. Then you can take all these criticisms and discuss them instead of slamming the door or, rejecting your friend for 30 years because he changed.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing, Eric, it's we fundamentalism claims more for these ancient texts than these texts claim for themselves. We impose on the text certain understandings and definitions. It's eisegesis. We're putting things into the text. Whereas what we really should be doing is allowing the text to speak for itself. And that is what I do. I know that some who are very fundamentalist in their approach might argue that, but really, so for instance, when I look at Exodus 16, it is positioned in the text before they arrive at Sinai.
Right.
And in Exodus 16, as I've pointed out many times, without going through all the details, it tells us all about God gave us the manna for 40 years, and 40 years we ate manna and never stopped eating manna for 40 years. And you're not even at Sinai yet. And it says, oh, and by the way, there's this thing about the Sabbath. Well, the Sabbath command wasn't given. And you might say, well, yeah, it was known back in the garden. Look, we've got the most wonderful, glorious collection of ancient writings in the Bible. And my field is the Hebrew Bible, but there are so many wonderful things. But as we begin to assess and honestly, being, as I say, honest to Moses, honest to God, you're going to see things that are really going to make sense. Meanwhile, the fundamentalists within our group, and I love many of these people, and I get that there's some concern and anxiety, but they think they're defending God and defending the Bible when they argue against something so simple as, for instance, did Moses write of his own death? Look, dead people don't write. And that's not being ugly or disrespectful. And the rabbis toy with this. One side of the argument is, yes, Moses wrote that because they've already said Moses wrote the 5 books in all its entirety. So they have to say, well, he wrote that through his tears. But another rabbinic school says, no, the last 8 verses are written by Joshua. But that's
Right.
not true either because Joshua's mentioned in the third person. So we know Joshua. When did it? So question, Carolyn and Miriam, we're coming back to, is when, it's not when this pen, what Jeremiah called the lying pen, which is pretty harsh, but when did these stories develop is not so easy to pinpoint. But what is easier is to say, what are the signs that we have different pens? That's the main thing that I think we can begin to identify.
Right.
Examples like the monarchy. You have clearly the monarchy appearing in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14 through 20. And then you get to 1 Samuel 8 when the people ask for the king, and God and Samuel are surprised.
Right.
You would think that
Right.
one of them would say, no, no, no. God would say to Samuel, hang on, Samuel, don't be so upset. Remember Deuteronomy 17? I already said that. No, he acts mad too.
Right.
And then
Right.
in 1 Samuel 10:25, we have this weird verse just inserted, and it says this, Samuel, write the legislation of the king in the book. Well, to me, that indicates, at least in 1 Samuel 10:25, either that Samuel put that in Deuteronomy, or the writer wants to let us know that it came in later. We'll come back to that.
Right.
Todd and Angel. I'm sorry, you good, Eric?
Yep. Yep.
All right. Hang tight with us. Let's see. Todd and Angel, good morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Ross. I just kind of wanted to add on to what Eric was talking about. You know, when we started questioning things and finding differences in the Bible and stuff like that, that actually increased our faith because it made us do research.
Yeah.
And of course, it's been quite a wild ride, especially for the last, I don't know, 2 years, maybe. But, it doesn't make us mad. I can understand maybe several years ago it probably would have made us mad because we were church-going people and believed everything the pastor told us.
Right.
And King James only. And, those kind of deals. And he didn't really appreciate the fact that we started questioning things. But I brought up the hypothesis thing to him one day about Noah being two different stories, which they really don't contradict each other. They're just two different stories.
Exactly.
And oh man, he lost his lid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you serious? Because seminary is a poisonous doctrine. I mean, that's because he even told us that what they taught him is what he preaches. He can't change anything, and you're not allowed to ask questions when you are in seminary.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that on our journey, finding different things was strengthening. One thing you brought up in the class this morning that I got to thinking of that we've asked ourselves is you were talking about how in the wilderness they were like, well, we're starving, we want meat, we want this, that, and the other, and what about all the animals they brought with them? Didn't they think to eat those?
Yeah.
Doesn't say that in the Bible. And it just makes you scratch your head. It's like, okay, so he sends them birds and it kills half of them.
Yeah.
Here's your meat.
Yeah. You want it, we'll give you enough to come out your nose kind of thing.
Yep.
It really is, when people begin to notice, first of all, it's almost like we feel like, and you mentioned this of your friend, the pastor, and I have pastors' friends as well, that they feel they can't question. Some of them, it's not out of fear. Some are afraid they don't want to, go to hell or whatever.
Right.
But I think a lot of them really are concerned. There is, and I appreciate a good respect for the Bible. As we've said, I love the Bible. I really, really do.
Oh yeah.
But I also recognize that these various interpretations and understandings should be subject to a good, thorough, historical, critical assessment. Because if you, as you know, and we've seen this, the world has seen people lives ruined because people accepted a particular view of a text that may or may not have been from God. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, and that's, how many times has that happened over time? Who knows?
Yeah, I was just reading a comment that Charles made about how many preacher arguments start. I have a question. We used to do a thing. The church we were in, the last church we were in, was a very small church, so everything was done in the sanctuary, including Sunday school.
Right.
So he would always start Sunday school. Does anybody have any questions before we start? And everybody would turn around and look at us. I mean, everybody in the sanctuary, because they knew we had a question.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, well, I'm going to have to go research that and get back with you next week. And he never would. He never would. He's a nice guy, don't get me wrong, but he never would. He would never come back the next week, and I would even ask him, well, I'm still researching that. Like, okay, sure.
Yep. And maybe this person is still researching. I've met people along the way who, I would present certain things to them, and they would give me similar answers, and some never came back to me. And then years later, I've met others who said, man, I hadn't seen you in a while, but here's where I'm at now. And sometimes it takes root. And I've told this story before. I want people to stick with it. I mean, it's not my call, but I'm saddened when someone says, I was a Christian, I challenged that, I put it away. I was kind of teetering on a one form or another of Judaism or B'nai Noah or Hebrew roots or whatever. I found problems with that. I put that, and eventually they just said, I just reached the place where I'm done with it all. That does bother me. I don't want that to happen to people, but I can't help it. But I do know people who have followed these classes that I've been sharing for the last few years, and they've just basically given up on a biblical religious faith. And some have written me and said, not to be ugly, but they've said, thanks a lot, Ross. It's I joking. In fact, you told me the other day that it wasn't you, Todd, but somebody commented on a video. We mentioned that we're working on this Northern Prophet. They asked a question about the Northern Prophets, and I said, well, I'm working on a series right now, and the response was, please don't.
Yeah.
It's like, don't give me, I don't want to know. If it's something wrong with the Northern Prophets, just stop. Leave us alone, Ross. But anyway.
That's one of the things our preacher was always telling us. He's right before we left, he said, the road you're going down, it won't be long before you deny Jesus Christ at the same point.
Yeah.
It's like, are you kidding me? And we have actually learned more about him since then.
Right.
That the church won't even talk about. So anyway.
Good stuff. Well, stick around.
We will.
Dr. Tabor.
Okay, just bouncing off that, what Ross said and Todd. First of all, our organization, not church, educational organization, welcomes 20, 30 different views of the Messiah.
Right.
If you know what I mean. In other words, we don't mind the diversity. And actually, I guess we're tolerant of almost any view that somebody has if somebody's sincere. So I think of it as a fellowship and a connection. People ask me, are you part of anything? Do you go anywhere? And I go to local synagogues just because of my connections with the rabbis here and so forth. I've spoken at all of them, but I'm not a regular, Sabbath morning. I'm part of the Jewish community. And I don't go to any church. So I think I just want everybody to know, and I think everybody here knows this. You never have to be afraid of saying anything. You could say Jesus is God if you want. If you wanted to talk to me about it, I would try to take you through texts of the New Testament that actually don't support that. And the few that you think do have probably been mistranslated or misinterpreted. But again, education, not like, don't
Yeah.
come back now and tell me you think that, or we'll kick you out. But what I was going to say also about not getting discouraged, what Ross said, um, here's my Bible. It's got Old Testament, so-called Hebrew Bible, New Testament, and Apocrypha. It'd be too thick to put the Dead Sea Scrolls in, but this is the core central material. And this is my old RSV, Ross, and just happened to have it handy here
Yeah.
instead of the new Oxford one, but because I'm more familiar with the pagination, you know how that is, you guys.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, used it since the 80s. I think I could tell you any page of Paul or Mark and what was at the top. So
Yeah.
anyway, there is what I call a blue thread running through this book. I'm talking about the Tanakh now. Apocrypha, New Testament, we lose a lot of it. And what I mean by the blue thread is what actually Paul, for example, says is written in every heart. The Torah is written in the heart. And what happens when you read it is a little bell goes off. Ding, ding, ding. Chloe's nodding her head, right? If you're not edified by popping the heads off birds with your fingernail and sprinkling buds 7 times and all that, I'm not either. I'm not really into that kind of ritual. Who was? We could discuss sacrificial system, how did it come in? But I am really into, and what does the Lord require of you? Deuteronomy 10, and that ringing. And that's what I mean by the blue thread. I'll start crying if I talk about the blue thread. The blue thread is why we never will throw out the Bible. Now, I want to give you a historical perspective. I studied with the greatest historian of religions probably that's ever lived. I think more than Eliade, if you know historians of religions. Certainly more than Campbell, because he was just a popularizer. Jonathan Z. Smith, smartest man I've ever known. And he taught me, not dogmatically, he was Jewish. Smith is still Jewish. He taught me that in the entire ancient world, in the entire Hellenistic Greek world, only one religious tradition, and he means the Tanakh, did not major in afterlife, the world to come. The main question people think is religion, and it's a very selfish question. What's going to happen to me when I die? Oh, that's the focus of world history. Great. Now we got to find that out, right? And I love Deuteronomy 29:29. And yes, I'm taking it out of context, but it's a blue thread.
Yeah.
The secret things belong to God, and the things he reveals belong to us. So you say, well, Dr. Tabor, do you believe in resurrection? I'll tell you the evidence for resurrection in the Hebrew Bible. I'm talking about the Hebrew Bible here. It's fairly slim, fairly controversial, but there is some. But how about the evidence for justice and righteousness?
Yeah.
Filling the earth and treating other humans correctly and treating animals correctly and actually doing what is called in Judaism tikkun ha'olam, to perfect the world, to repair the world. It's been very damaged. I think you could agree. I woke up this morning, none of the news was good. Remember that Steve Earle song that John Baez sings? The death machines were rolling across the ground where Jesus stood. But she ends with Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 2. Someday, this is where I get the chills. Read Isaiah 2, Isaiah 11. The earth full of the knowledge of the Lord. People hear a word behind them. This is the way, walk therein. They will all know me from the least to the greatest. Now, I can historically back off and say, well, those are nice pipe dreams. We call them pipe dreams because, they're never going to happen. Well, then why does the UN have the Isaiah wall quoting Isaiah 2 outside the flags of 168 nations? Right? Do they follow it? No, but it's not the Quran. And also, you'd think it might be the New Testament because we're a quote Christian nation when it was put a Jesus thing in, like I bring you peace or something. Uh, and they put Isaiah because it's so powerful. And you know this. You can read prophets, Job. Oh my goodness, some of the things in Job. I just have to say, never a person spoke like this, like
Yeah.
all of these things. And there's not another book like it. The New Testament doesn't even hold a candle to it. It's reflecting some of it, thank God. Now, I personally believe Jesus of Nazareth was a bright candle for the blue thread, saying things like, hey, from the beginning, it wasn't so,
Right.
but Moses allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts and so forth. That's the blue thread I'm talking about. What is the ideal? What is the best? And to me, this group has such a potential to grow, and numbers are not everything, but to grow and to have influence is everything, right? Influence, growth, influence. It really does. And I think it's going to be like cool water in a desert to people when they finally taste of this message as we can really put it forth. And so I've been studying 60 years, seriously, the Bible. I'm 78 years old. So you can figure out about when I started really seriously. I was baptized at 10, but boy, at 18, 17, 18, I was listening to Herbert Armstrong. I was reading every booklet, Jacob O. Meyer, Sacred Name, everything any of you done, I've done. Pentecostal churches, holiness, one God. I never got the tongues or anything like that, so I'm not saying that, but I've been exposed to it all, Judaism across the board. And I hold up the Tanakh. I should just pull a Tanakh, right? I have one within reach, but you get the idea. I hold up the Tanakh. And Smith taught me, and he wasn't attending any synagogue or anything. He probably was a sort of process theist, maybe. I'm not even sure what he was. He was just making a historical point that all the religions of the world went for afterlife, mysticism, even Judaism.
Yep.
Kabbalism is reincarnation and cycles of souls and everything. I went to a Jewish funeral this week and it was hard because I love the rabbi. It's Rabbi Groner, and he's actually the son of the Rabbi Groner who tended to the Rebbe, his chief assistant. And I love Yossi Groner. He's the rabbi here, Lubavitch. But I'm telling you, he goes, well, let me give you a spiritual interpretation of what's happening here. And, we've got the corpse right there of my dear, dear friend, Joan Brigham. And I knew that she didn't believe that, but she wanted a Jewish burial and she got it. But what I realized, and people in the car with me who don't know the Bible, including my daughter, said, well, is that really Judaism? Is that what, like, all this stuff you study, is that what the Jews say? I said, Eve, and others were asking this. I said, he said, let me give you the mystical interpretation. I said, there's not a line of that in the Hebrew Bible, not one line.
Yeah.
Not one line. You say, oh, but there's words like or, yeah, light. And what does that mean? Light, and metaphorically, your light, your path. Okay. But that, you know what I'm saying. Now, if some of you like the Kabbalah, fine, but I'm just talking now about the Tanakh. So what is in the Tanakh? We all know. To walk humbly, to love justice and so forth, to love, right? We know it's in the Tanakh. But it's wonderful to have a religious history of a group that pioneered that way. And I believe it still has a great future, in the world. It's the only solution. It's the only solution. Just think of the 10 words if they were followed. Just imagine.
Yep.
Take any one of them. Throw your car keys away. Forget your safes. Leave your cash out. Leave your gold bars out on the kitchen table. Look at them and enjoy your wealth. Nobody's going to take them. And I hope just think of the beautiful potential human beings have. It's so simple. One creator, God, and the way. And the plan. Got to add the plan, because how else? The plan is the historic plan of the chosen people in the land. But those are the pillars, aren't they? One creator,
Yep.
God, intimate with you. That's all you need. No intermediate. It's so beautiful. So stick with us.
Absolutely.
Don't get discouraged. A lot of things we don't know, but half of them don't matter.
Good stuff.
It's in your mouth and before you right now.
Clody, how are you? Shabbat Shalom, my friend.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Shabbat Shalom. I was in a reverie, listening to Dr. Tabor. It always happens to me.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I wanted to add something. I think that one of the worst things that can happen to people is being on a narcissistic relationship. And that's loving unconditionally and without looking, listening, and understanding what is happening from the other side. Most of the empaths, people that love narcissists, do this. They don't see what is happening to their partner, if they love them back or not, if they are doing the things that they have promised or not. They just love and love and love and say yes to everything. And if they see something that is not good, they try to blind themselves and brainwash themselves. What happened to me with people that wanted and liked to talk about God was almost the same thing, similar thing. Because in a world where a few people love God and want to talk about God and about the meaning of life and why are we here and how is what's God's plan and so on, it's a rarity to hear and to listen people that love God. So when I started reading to the Bible, I understood that it was everything that was going on my mind was justified. People inside the Bible were talking about God and were listening to God, and God was talking back to them. So it was very easy for me to drink every word. I loved every word. And if something didn't make sense, I would say, it's okay. It will make some sense eventually. So it's very difficult to get out of the toxicity. It's very difficult. You have to be brave and, as you say, honest to yourself and to Moses. What I'm sensing, though, like Dr. Tabor was putting it, is that now has come the time when an army of God is looking for the needles in the hay. Because understanding what is added, what is poetry, what is philosophy, and what is the real deal is like looking and searching for the needle in the hay. It's a very difficult thing. I was admiring your patience, Russ. I was admiring it today. I was like, God has blessed this man with such a big patience and love about the truth. And he's staying there hours and hours and weeks and months and years doing the same thing. And it's really, I admire it, and it's inspirational. And may God bless us with the same patience. And each and every one of us make our part of finding the needles in the hay. That's what we are here for, I believe. And as Dr. Tabor put it in the conference, each and every one of us should dedicate themselves, and I pray God we have the patience and the time to make our part in this searching of the needles and of the blue thread and of the truths. And then after we make all our part, God will make the revelations. I think that's the way it happened. All the time it happened the same. People were trying to search God. They started repenting, and then God gave something back. That's my input. Okay.
Good comments. No, I really appreciate that. Look, I think I'm surrounded by people with patience, and it's for me, it's a commitment. It's a relationship. I had June the 10th was 51 years. You saw last year I released Following Jesus Out of Christianity. That was when I said I'm in. I do. And for me, it's not really an option. Like I know other people who have YouTube channels who I don't, I'm not here to judge other people. Some of you were there with me Wednesday when, I talked for 2.5 hours. And James and others have told me about the reading of comments, different people have different views on that. I went through and I read some of those comments, and it wasn't like I don't get my feelings hurt very much, but I thought somebody to listen to 2.5 hours. I remember one really struck me. One of the comments was fake. 2.5 hours, and that's the response is fake. And I thought, well, that's give me more. Then I had people who said things like, this is so dumb. My 11-year-old daughter walked in and saw it and called it a scam and turned around and walked out. And so you get all those kind of comments, but then in the midst of that, you reach people who are sincere and really seeking. And that, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I know who's really seeking when they agree with me. That's the way it sounded. But my point is that there are a lot of people who know that we have difficulties in the text. There are people who know that they don't hold a fundamentalist view of the Bible, but they still love God. They still are latching on, as James called, to that blue thread and some of the descriptions that you've given, Clody. There's something more than just, like, I'm not going to just latch on to some atheistic ideology and live the rest of my life. I told Jonah and I had a lot of good heart-to-heart while he was here. It was just the two of us in the room. And it's, you think of the passage in Daniel, though he slay me, you just, or the New Testament, where do we go? What else is there? This is it. It's a pursuit that we've committed to. And I say we continue with the path. We hang tight and we look for those things that are true, and we latch onto those. And look, I think years ago, I put the New Testament on the shelf respectfully because I felt like my field, my main interest, my passion, my life was oriented around the Hebrew Bible. But I've not thrown anything out. I mean, I still love those texts. And I don't don't typically have a lot of friends who are hostile to that. You know, a lot of people, I see people who, even though I gave a class following Jesus out of Christianity, I was very clear in that I am where I am because of that wonderful love for the Bible that I grew up with. And so anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, but you get the point. Clody, did you have other points?
Yes, I just had something to follow. I meant with the relationship, the narcissistic relationship. It becomes healthy when you really listen, read, look, talk, and communicate. If you don't communicate, then that is not a healthy relationship. So you have to communicate. You read to the Bible, and then you pray, and then you start pondering, reflecting, and then you see, and then you test, and then you ask, and then you make deep discussions with friends or non-friends. So that is the difference in being brainwashed and keeping a healthy relationship. The communication.
And I think what we're doing here today is a very important part of helping us all to make it through some of these more difficult questions. I mean, look, I feel like I'm surrounded by a whole host of teachers. So that's one of the things that interests me, is that I've always wanted to do a dialogue. You present a subject, and then you follow up with an opportunity for people to have questions and comments. And that's why I really like this part of it, because there's an accountability piece, number one. Like, I don't just log on and spout something that might challenge people's faith and then go disappear. We immediately turn on the cameras and people have a chance to argue or offer different perspectives. So you're as important in this. Talk about a relationship. It's a community relationship as well as a relationship with God. And we can keep each other on track. James points this out often about United Israel and the extended group of people, whether you are part of United Israel or have been part of that, or you just join our group here, and we don't have card-carrying members. But the other thing that we don't have is some hierarchical system of religious leaders, like where you have to bow down, or that person's
Wait a
word.
minute, Ross. I thought I was in charge. Are you saying that?
Oh, you're still here, James. I didn't know. But you know the idea. I mean, honestly, that's the way it is. And
you guys all know I'm kidding, right? Okay.
yeah, they know that. Hopefully. But this is a good part of everything we do. And this, you know, even with in our world, technology has allowed this. This is incredible. We have people in France, we have people in the US, all over the place. We have people in England. We have people in Albania. Arta is here. And so, you know, I mean, this is an incredible tool. Thomas, how are you, my friend? Shabbat Shalom.
I am good. Interesting subject. It's funny, I had some notes. I was going to challenge a couple of particular details, but now I just want to let me just share like what has been my perspective, right, on like why Elohim here and Jehovah there, and ask a question because you guys obviously have studied, you know, you and James, 60 years of Bible study. Wow, I'm just barely 60 years old here. Okay, so like from my perspective, right, when I read the Bible, when I see, I think Elohim is referring to when God speaks to us in our mind. You know, it's spirit, it's invisible, it's ruach. And Jehovah is written like a verb. And like when Jehovah is used, I believe that it's it's actually recognizing the creation and our physical environment. So when it says Jehovah said to
Yes.
Moses, Moses is audibly hearing that through his ears. Whereas when it says, so like in the Noah account, for example, Elohim tells Noah, take 2 of each creature, right? Clean and unclean, right? But then Jehovah tells him to take 7 clean. Why? Because Methuselah, I would argue that God was speaking through Methuselah, telling Noah, you better take 7 clean animals, because if you kill 2, if you kill any of them, there won't be any more after the flood. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Whether this is accurate or not, I don't know. That this has been my belief. Okay, Elohim comes to Abraham and says, sacrifice, bring Isaac up to the mountain and kill him. But then Jehovah from the sky, I believe he audibly heard that, tells him to stop, because that needed to be audibly heard. But the idea that Abraham was willing to do it just from what his conscious contact with God was so strong that that's how well he heard God in his mind. That's what the text is expressing to me. Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. So my question would be, when you speak of like the E source versus the J source, right? Does the E source, it is like earlier you were saying the idea of the spirit, does the E source express this spirit aspect more than the J source?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I know what you're asking me. I hear the words of your mouth. But what I would say is this, while we're just talking about perspectives, what we biblical scholarship people who study, and by the way, I know that you're a very deep student of Scripture, so I mean to include you in this. If you look at, like you gave a couple of things. You said, I believe that Elohim, when Elohim is used, it's the voice that we hear and so forth. And what I would suggest is what others have done is they've looked at, does that hold up throughout the text? Is Elohim, the voice that is associated with Elohim, is that always going to fall out? Like if you built 2 columns and you said, let me prove my theory, that's what I would challenge you to do. Because for instance, what Judaism has done is they have looked at this in a similar way, that Yod-Heh Vav-Heh represents this aspect. They have the mercy and the, yeah. So I've seen something very similar to this. What I'm talking about is separate from, those are theological ideas. Those are ideas that someone comes to accept. This is the way I see it. What I'm going to challenge is, I'm going to say that if you look at the text consistently throughout, you see that you have different stories that are written, different sources that are written different ways with different facts. These are alternative facts. So again, the examples that I've given, if you look at the sheet that I put out today, because I really put a lot of time into this, it's just a 24-page snapshot. If you look at the story of the spies, whose idea is it? So this is beyond whether it's Elohim or Jehovah, but what begins to happen is you see that one source tells a story a certain way, another source tells the story a different way with different facts. What scholars then began to notice is, hey, there are a whole bunch of these. And here's something else they noticed, was that one, almost without exception, employs the name Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. Another source uses Elohim. So I think it's a little bit more to it. Again, people can often, without looking at the evidence really closely, they can push it aside. But what James uploaded earlier, that's about, I don't know how many pages it is, but it's quite a bit there. And I encourage people to go through it and look at it and just weigh the evidence for that, whether there are distinct sources. Because again, it's easy to just say, well, I don't accept that theory. And you go, well, have you read it? Well, no, I haven't, but I don't, that's what most people do. In fact, one person who was critiquing the Shapiro manuscript, a whole different subject, but someone tagged me in a YouTube post, a scholar that I know, and I'm acquaintances with him. And one of his points is that he started listing why it's not real. And while he respects what Edan Dershowitz did, he doesn't accept what he does and then what he believes. And then at the very end, he said, but I haven't read it. I haven't read it, right? So here's the question. If I say to anyone, I don't accept your theory, and you go, well, have you listened to it? Well, no, I hadn't listened to it, but I'm not going to accept it. Did you read this? So I would encourage, especially Tom, because I know that you do dig deeply, if you're interested, some people aren't interested. If you're not interested, don't do it. But if you're interested to see, does your theory fit within this, or does your theory disprove this even? Because it could, maybe it does. But I would recommend that people at least look at it. And that's why I say I think it might benefit the group offline. Maybe I'll do something on, another night of the week that I don't have plugged in for something else. Maybe we could start having a discussion on whether or not this has any weight. Is there a merit to it? Is it, I think some people might like that. So I don't want to dismiss your theory. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
James.
I was just going to add a comment for Tom because I know Tim and Sue and Karen are lined up. Always like to hear what they have to say. You could be noticing something, and Ross was essentially saying this, I'm just saying a little differently, that is in the sources. In other words, and you picked up on it. Lots of study Bibles do the very thing you're talking about. Yours actually is an interesting new take that I hadn't thought of. But usually it's what, this is the covenant name, and this is the universal name, and this is that, this, that, or the other. So I think it's a fair thing. But again, I totally would go with Ross on that. The test would be to work through each of, do J and E.
Yeah.
And read, and you can actually, I don't know if Ross is ready to share this or not. It's nothing other than he took the American Standard Version and divided it into a document with all the sources. Have you given that to people, or would you?
I haven't. No, I haven't yet, but I might.
The reason I like it is I can just sit and read E.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, and I've got it right here. Look. Why do I have it so close by?
Yeah.
You'll be able to see that. The Book of James.
Oh, you get the wrong book. You said E.
No, I said
but
I
it's
just joking.
The book is broken down by the sources.
Yeah, it's got the three. Here they are. I separate them with paper clips. So it really makes a difference. And then the redactor he puts in red. This is Friedman's theory, okay? It's not Ross Nichols. He just took Friedman and said, I want to look at it. And what you could do with a bit of study, and anyone else who wants to try it, is just try to empty your mind of any preconceptions and read J, read E, and read P. And see what do you pick up even before you study? Most of us, if we read a story or a piece, we kind of get or a movie or anything, we get the gist, right? You go like, oh, okay, I've got the core thing is here. Oh my God, this gets mentioned over and over. And then you go to the next thing. This has never even mentioned.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. And just so you know, there are things that just really stand out. Like if you read Deuteronomy and and we're doing some of this, and I do this all the time and have for a few years to make these points. But if you said, tell me about the love of God and circumcision of heart, and you start listing off those things that so many of us have found so moving and so incredibly, it's such a part of our faith, and you go, but that's not in Exodus, it's not in Leviticus, it's not in Numbers, it's only in Deuteronomy. With all your heart, with all your soul, 9 times. Not in Exodus, not in Leviticus, not in Numbers, only in Deuteronomy. You start beginning to notice not only stories that are sourced differently. It's not just a matter of, did God tell them to send spies, or did that idea come from the people? These are very important levels of understanding that I think are interesting. I would be fascinated to hear your take on this, Tom, just because you've sent some of your ideas before. Again, I want people to look at it, shoot it down if you wish, but do so on the text of the Bible. I think it would be interesting. I think you'd enjoy that too.
That's why I thank James for that resource he just shared, and somebody else. I'm sorry, I think it was Carolyn shared a YouTube videos from Friedman.
Yeah.
But if I could just express a little more, the idea, because like when I look at the book of Genesis, this is the beginning of the creation of Israel. The way I look at it, it's the beginning of the formation, the foundation of Israel, and there are examples in that book to show, because like, I don't know about you, but I know in my life, God speaks to me. That's the way God speaks to me. Sometimes it's in my mind, and how well do I hear it, versus my wife or a colleague or a person. Like I could be thinking something, I really should move to Alabama. And then all of a sudden somebody comes over and somebody I'm talking to, and all of a sudden they're saying, have you ever thought about moving to Alabama?
Yeah.
It's like, that's like a second witness for me.
Right.
And to me, when I look at the book of Genesis, it's showing me, it's how the patriarchs recognized God in their lives. And that's what the book of Genesis is for me. It's showing these examples.
Just so you know, I love the book of Genesis. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't love and benefit from the book of Genesis. And again, this is not to take away. This has nothing to do. When I talk about authorship of a biblical text, that has nothing to do with how God speaks to Tom or James or Clody or Karen or anyone. What I want to do is understand the text. I've made it clear and received a lot of harsh criticism when I read the story of God telling Abraham to go kill his son. And I've said, if I heard that, I'm out. And people, they get very critical and they say, well, who are you to? And I'm just saying, other people can say what they wish on that. But I think that I would at that point say, I'm done. And people say, well, you don't have faith. Well, maybe not. But I love a lot of the stories of the patriarchal narratives. The other thing that I think is interesting about that story, speaking of patriarchal narratives, and I know other people are waiting to talk, but I'd say we have some interesting things that occur in the text after that. How soon after does Sarah die? Do we ever have another mention in the text where Isaac speaks to Abraham? I mean, there are certain things we can deduce from it. But again, what we're talking about on authorship is different than our relationship with God, because those are things that, like if God tells you to move to Alabama, I'm going to say, call Charles when you get there. I know at least one person that lives there.
But maybe you're missing my point. My point is, like with the Abraham account, it says God tested Abraham. It's like how, yeah, I don't know about you, but he says, listen to my voice, right? You know this. You mentioned it many times in your,
Oh
in
yeah.
your teachings, right? Well, how do you hear the voice of God? Do you hear it? Do you hear it when other people speak audibly, or do you hear it in your mind? And we talk about conscious contact. I remember when I was in AA, they used to talk about conscious contact. And sometimes I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like God's telling me to do something, and it's just in my mind, though. And is it my mind? Is it my own imagination, or is it really God?
Yeah.
And I can see how God testing. Here's Abraham. He's responding. And all he's just hearing it in his mind. And he's maybe once in a while, sometimes people will say it too. So now that's when Jehovah speaks to him. And then God says, okay, I'm going to test. I want to see how far this guy is. How well does he really hear me? And he tells him, kill your son.
Mm-hmm.
And he hears him so well that he is willing to do it. It's like, I can't imagine that in my life, but it's like, that's what makes Abraham's faith so great, the faith of Abraham, So anyway,
yeah,
I see other people up. I'll leave it at that. And I'm going to go through some of these references from Friedman and see how my theory holds up. So
yeah, very good. All right. Thank you
fair
then.
enough.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Hey, Timothy, Shabbat Shalom. How are you?
I'm like, get out.
Sorry, I'll learn how to unmute one of these days. So I didn't get a chance to listen to your whole presentation today.
Okay.
But to tell it myself, but I love what we're talking about as far as sources are concerned. And just probably a month ago, I just got Friedman's. It's called The Bible with Sources Revealed, and it's exactly what you're talking about, where it's different colors. Some of them are italicized, depending upon if he thinks it's a redactor or whatever. But anyway, I've been trying to go through that. I haven't really got through all of it, but in this, so this may be derailed the conversation because I wanted to talk about I was reading in the book of Psalms, and I can't remember if you've ever picked up on this or mentioned this, and so maybe forgive me if this is something you've already mentioned. But I was reading in Psalm 50, and it just sounded like the Moses scroll to me in certain ways. So, well, specifically in 7, and I don't read Hebrew, so that's where I would like. I don't know if the Hebrew is the same. In other words, but
right
in the English, the Psalm chapter 15, verse 7, at the end of it, it says, "I am God, your God," which reminded me of that same with the punks. But if you also go through it also mentions several things that are that would be in the 10 words, talking about wicked people, what they do. And then also it also talks about, he kind of emphasizes about sacrifice, where he says that it's like, he's like, I created all the animals, so why do I need you to kill them, basically. I mean, that's Tim's paraphrasing, but anyway, anyway, I just didn't know if you ever, I couldn't remember in the back of my mind if I ever heard you mention any correlation between that. But, and also I was wondering, to be on topic or more on topic, I was wondering too, if in Psalms, I know Psalms is quite a collection of different things, but I know like this one is in the book 2 of Psalms. And it does seem like it does seem like they use Elohim more than Jehovah, Yahweh, or whatever, however you want to say it, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So I don't know, just throwing that out there. I don't know if that's really
no. Your observations are very, very good. What I would say, first of all, because you threw out several things, but just so I cover it, this particular psalm happens to be a psalm of Asaph, and it is also a psalm that is what are referred to as the Elohist Psalms. So you can look that up. You can Google it. You probably find there's probably a good article on Wiki. I don't know that, but Elohist, Elohist, Elohist Psalms. And what they began to notice, scholars, particularly in the 19th century, is that certain Psalms use the name Elohim and not the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now, I have taught a little bit on this, but let me just go ahead and say, we have stories, we have accounts between 1 Samuel, and I normally would have this off the top of my head, but I almost think that there is a correlation between Psalm 18 and a passage in 1 Samuel. Let me look at this. Yeah, Psalm 18, and it's to do with David, who addressed the words of this song to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hands of his enemies. So Psalm 18, if I'm not mistaken, 2 Samuel 22 is a very similar, it's the same story. It's almost identical, except one uses Jehovah, one uses Elohim. The psalm that you picked up, Psalm 50, is quite incredible for a number of reasons. One, it's an Elohist psalm, and whenever the Shapira manuscript came forward in 1883 in Europe, this is one of the things that they first said was, they said, look, the fact that it uses Elohim instead of Jehovah is an indication of its inauthenticity. And one of the scholars stepped up and said, no, this is like Psalm 45, Psalm 50. There are several of these, by the way. And so that is a good point that you bring up. I encourage people to look at that. Why is it that some authors in the biblical text employ, they write the same story, but they either use Elohim or Jehovah? That's what we find in the Torah. The second point is that it is also considered an intertext, a Decalogue intertext, meaning it's one of the places in the Hebrew Bible. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 9 is another example where the Ten Commandments seem to be alluded to. This is one of those texts. And then finally, the anti-sacrificial message that is very strong in this one, where God is speaking according to the psalmist, and he's saying, if I was hungry, I wouldn't come to you for food. Do I drink the blood of bulls and goats and so forth? We see this in some of these psalms as well. Psalm 40 is another example of at least the anti-sacrificial message. Now, what you see, let me just show you one example, if I can just take this psalm thing a little bit further. Look at Psalm 51, one of the most beautiful pieces of the Bible. Okay, David has committed a grave offense. He's taken an innocent man's woman. He got her pregnant, had the husband killed, right? And so this story, that's one of the other reasons I love the Hebrew Bible. It's raw. It tells the truth. You know, you get these stories as you would read it in the paper. So, but if you read through there, just let me hit a few high points. Verse 7, wash me thoroughly, cleanse me from my sin. Verse 3, I know my transgressions, my sin is ever before you. Purge me, verse 7, with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, I'll be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Blot out my transgressions. I'm going through very quickly. Verse 10, create in me a clean heart. Put a new and right spirit within me. He goes on. The idea is that no sacrifices are needed. Okay, here we go. Verse 16. For you have no delight in sacrifice. Now, people get theologically bent out of shape when I read those words. I just want y'all to know I did not write this. I didn't write it. I didn't put this in here. It's not a magic trick. If I were to give a burnt offering, you would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. Oh God, you will not despise. And you know what everybody here says? Keep reading, Ross. Keep reading. So I am. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. Okay. Now, what people will say, they accuse me of picking and choosing, stopping, not reading the full text. And they say, Ross, I can see where you could say that God doesn't want sacrifices if you stop at verse 17. Let me tell you why I stop at 17, because that's when the pen of the original author stopped. How in the world could I say that? Let's say this really is a psalm attributed to David. Do we think that in David's times, the walls of Jerusalem had been destroyed? No. This is at the highest peak of Jerusalem's. Do we think that the altar, that sacrifices have ceased in the time of David? No. See, this piece of the poem, of the psalm, is reflecting a later author who probably is a little disturbed or maybe has received some criticism, this psalm, because it doesn't reflect the later view that sacrifices are needed. Now, I know that not everyone's going to agree with that, but to suggest that during David's time, the walls of Jerusalem need to be rebuilt, this is after the destruction. See? So anyway, I think that, back to your original point, the Elohist Psalms are very interesting, and so are Elohist texts, where the name of God is, where Elohim is used instead of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And there's quite a bit there, actually.
Yeah, or at least primarily, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you have some of these texts which clearly were updated, where, like we just see in Psalm 51. There are those cases, I think, that are pretty obvious.
Yeah. I didn't mean to derail the discussion at all, but
No, you didn't take us out of the Bible, and this is a very important part of it. So, no, I appreciate it. All right, Timothy. Hey, Sue. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
How are you?
So I'm doing really good. Praise Hashem. Several things. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for teaching us this method of study, because it's added so much depth to my understanding of Scripture, and it has built my faith. And I'm very grateful for that. And I wanted to thank Dr. Tabor. Is he still with us?
If he's not, I will pass that on. I think
thank you. There are two things I want to thank him for. And the one is giving me that, the idea of the blue thread, because I've been a follower of the blue thread for many years now. I just didn't have a name for it.
Right.
And I really appreciate that. And the other was, I think it was something Carolyn said, that as she's come to study the Word and understand Jesus more, that's made a tremendous difference to me. When I first left the church, I was very bitter, and I didn't even want to hear the name of Jesus. I felt betrayed. And so I'm thankful to Dr. Tabor for helping me to understand who the real man was. And now I've come to love him and appreciate him. So those are the three things I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will pass those on. And you're talking about Friedman in the last point, right? About appreciating him. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Friedman is amazing. I love his work.
Yeah. And again, just so people understand, like, I can benefit greatly from someone's work and not necessarily agree with everything they say or write. So please feel free. And the same thing goes for me. What I would love, I love it when people say, look, I get this, and it's okay. I get things where people say, Ross, I like you, but I like what you say, but I just don't agree with you here. look, that is fine. It's welcome and it's encouraged. The last thing I need in my life is a bunch of people walking around saying whatever Ross says is exactly right, because that would not be true, first of all, and I don't want that. I would rather somebody say, a good friend, this is biblical, this is like from the Proverbs, and it's also from the Torah, is we are to challenge people and we're to let them know when they're wrong.
Right.
And just like I try to be respectful when I do that with my friends, I would ask that people do that with me. But I mean, I can take a hard message if somebody just wants to be hateful and tell me I'm wrong. That's okay. I can take it that way too. I just prefer. So, but anyway, to your point, I happen to be a big fan of Richard Elliott Friedman. But I don't agree with everything he teaches, and maybe that's because I'm not as smart as he is. Who knows? But yeah. So I will pass those messages on to Tabor when I talk to him. And thanks for being with us again, Sue. As
Oh, thank
always.
you. This is such a joy. I love hearing the comments, especially the discussions when people are comparing their understanding. Like what Tom was just sharing was fascinating to me. Karen and Clo and Miriam,
Yeah.
wonderful to hear the different thoughts because there's so much more I have yet to learn. And as they share their thoughts, it leads me into new lines of thinking. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yep. And let me add one more point, and Karen's up next. But one thing I wanted to add back to Tom's point and to this whole idea of the documentary hypothesis. The reason I put the document together that I put together was because I was testing the hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
What we do in science or in critical historical studies is we test things. Like Tom said something that's really quite interesting to me, and I'm going to be looking for it. He said, I have this idea, and I happen to know he studies deeply. He said, when Elohim is used, it's generally, and he gives his example. When Yod He Vav He is used, it's, I'm not going to say, well, that's dumb, Tom. Just go read. No, I'm going to say, hey, all right, well, test that out in the hypothesis. And the reason I say test it out in the hypothesis is because I think that there are valuable elements to the documentary hypothesis that would enhance people's understanding of the text if they could get it. I have things, James and I talk about this quite often, that I say, I don't think this is E. To me, and we argue this. So anyway, I love him. Friedman, but at the same time, I always test it. So good comments, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Karen, how are you today, my sister? Finally.
Good. Yeah, I was just gonna kind of talk on what you and Claudia already talked about with the leadership in this group. So when I think a lot of us that are coming out of other beliefs, we're trying to get away from putting anyone who's teaching us on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Before, that's a spiritual leader. That man's the oracle of God. You're supposed to submit yourself to his authority.
That's right.
Then you come out of that. And then we join this other group and we try to put Ross on a pedestal and we try to put James on a pedestal. And we might get offended if they do something we don't like. And we might not like it when they have friends that we don't like. And I just have to remind people, don't do that, because that's not this. You're not in that situation anymore.
Yeah.
Ross is not my spiritual leader. Sorry, Ross. But, we have to look at it like I'm going to college. I'm at a university. Say my college professor gets thrown in the clink the night before for being drunk. And then he comes to class next day a little disorderly, but he's still, I'm there for the facts. I'm not
right.
Because I'm going to do everything he tells me to do. And
you're not a good cult follower. I don't know.
No, not really. And it's good, that we can be in a group that respectfully disagrees with each other. I've been in some situations where you disagree, you're out.
Yeah.
But anywho, so, and I noticed that a little bit when I was at the conference. I think some of that was still kind of hanging over a little. Some people were still having a little trouble with that.
Yeah.
So it's just a little reminder that you're your own spiritual leader. You don't need somebody else to tell you what to do. And then I wanted to speak to Tom when he was talking about the Abraham Isaac situation and God testing Abraham. And when we take a test, there are true and false questions. The answer is true or the answer is false. It's yes or it's no. Maybe when God was testing Abraham, the answer was actually no, not yes. Maybe he failed that test. Maybe he should have said, no, the God I follow would never ask me to pass my son through the fire. If it actually happened, I'm not convinced that it did.
Right.
But, if it did, maybe that was the correct answer. Maybe that's what he was looking for. No, I wouldn't do that no matter who asked me to do it.
I agree with that.
So that's my thought on that.
Well, don't run off.
I disagree with me.
No, don't run off, because I want to comment on that too. I really mean this. This is not just make believe. I really believe that the people that surround me on this group, for instance, primarily this group, the people who are there every Saturday, are quite capable of listening to what I say, disproving things that aren't true, challenging the things that need to be challenged. And that's what I want. Years ago, because I was still maybe carrying baggage from my old days, I stood to teach. And I had read long before I took it into practice that when you do that, it's sort of it's I'm elevated, I'm on a bema, I'm on a platform, I'm talking down to you because I have whatever I have and you don't have you need what I have. So I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to feed you like a mama bird. I mean, that was the way. But one day I just said, what am I standing up for? Just sit down and have a conversation, share the things that I've studied, and then maybe figure out a way where other people can come and bring their insights, their challenges, their questions, their comments. And so I think that's the first thing. And I've had people who in tears have told me, I can't sit under your teaching. And I often, I want people to understand, you're not sitting under me. We are seated together.
Right.
Some of you might be standing up, but the ones I can see are all sitting down. And so that's the idea, is that we're doing this because we're having a conversation. And I think when I came back from Charlotte, the last conference that we did in Charlotte a year or so ago, year and a half ago now, one thing that Seth told me from his first exposure to the conference was, he said, the biggest thing people at that conference need and have expressed over and over is that they want to talk. They want to be heard. They want to share their ideas. And how do you do that? I just love to talk and I love to teach, but I want to create a world, a place where people can come and say, I want to talk too. I don't, that's what I would prefer. And so we've got a lot of ideas that we're trying to bring into exercise where, like the Horeb, I know some of you don't use yet the Discord. It's kind of awkward at first, I'll admit, but once you get into it, I want people to write articles and share their dreams or their ideas or their studies, because it benefits. I'm not there to say this is allowed or this isn't. Not too long ago, we had a person who was very Christian in their approach, and they shared quite a bit. And what I challenged was, the point that this person was not willing to let other people share. This person said things like, that there was an article on Sheol, and this person said, I don't want to talk about that. And you know, just there are 3 or 4 of those examples in a row. And then I said, hopefully not something real ugly, but the person got upset and left, because some people are not there yet. They don't want to come to the table and talk. And one final point for me, I don't use titles. At first, I don't have any titles, you know, like I don't have a PhD, so I'm not a doctor. I will afford that to people who do because they earned it. But as far as a religious teacher goes, I'm not the right reverend. I'm not pastor. I don't even go by, you know, any title. I want people to call me by my name. And I think that's important because, to your point, Karen, I don't need anybody putting me on any pedestal. My job, as I see it, is to facilitate a deeper study of Scripture and to invite people to have that conversation. And that, if we can do that, and if we can be an example, I tell you, when I went on this show, this thing Wednesday that I did, that's a different world. And I guess as a parent of 6 and a grandparent of 9, I don't like bullies. I don't like mean people. I can really come out of the box on somebody if I want to, but I want this group to be inviting. So let's say I go do a show and I come back and some of these people follow me. That's going to happen. And they're going to exhibit behaviors that we don't do. I'm asking my friends here, my fellow students, to when that stuff happens, don't give it any playtime, because I see that if you engage, they're there for one reason, and that's to be mean or hateful or critical. They don't know that I'm inviting people to a table to discuss. Give me your best argument. Like, don't let me talk for 2.5 hours on a subject and go, fake. Oh yeah, that's your answer? How about you give me some ancient text? How about talk to me in 3 different languages? Do something to prove that you have something of value to contribute. But see, I didn't say that. This is why you shouldn't put me on a pedestal, because that's what I'm really thinking, and worse. I'm calming myself down. But what I want us to do is to say, hey, you're invited to challenge. Let's have a discussion. Ross doesn't claim to be the end-all authority on this, but we can really set an example like James was talking about. This is a unique group. Think about it. Look, if we really wanted to grow the numbers, or I don't know, then there are ways to do that. And one way to do it is just to tell people there are no problems. This is the holy, inspired, inerrant, authoritative Word of God, and there are no mistakes in it, and every translation is right, and that's the way you get money and grow a group. To say, I invite you to look at some problems in the text of the Bible, that's not good business strategy. But you know what? It's going to prove to be people who are sincere, who want to know. They're coming here because they know we're going to talk truth, and we're going to do it where we invite others to share truth too, or shoot down, you know. I agree with your points, Karen. I think I just was adding to that because I think we all agree that the last thing we need, any of us, is someone who lords over the rest and assumes some position of authority.
I invited one of my Jewish friends to come and join our group and respectfully disagree with everyone if he wanted to. And you know, I don't think he's going to do it because Sabbath in Israel doesn't they don't turn their computers on and stuff until
Right.
after Shabbat, and I think it's like 6:30 over there. So maybe in the winter when it gets dark early, they'll join.
Right.
But they like the idea of a group that can respectfully disagree with each other without bullying. And and I'm not saying I don't have those thoughts. I'm not saying I don't listen to something and think that's the most boring thing I've ever heard. I want my 30 minutes back. But I'm not going to say
Yeah.
it. I'm not a jerk.
You think that about me? My 30 minutes? That was. I'm just
No,
joking.
it'd be more like 2 hours for you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Everybody has a limit.
Right. But anywho, I think that's about. But I'm ready for next week. I'll have notes for the discussion
Good
next
comments.
week. I'm a huge fan of I'm not a fan of Amalek but that whole what's going on at Kadesh Barnea thing.
Yeah. Good deal. All right. I look forward to that. Thanks, Karen. Todd and Angel.
I got one thing to say about what you was talking about a minute ago, Ross, about people getting upset about things when you bring up certain topics or whatever. But one of the things that y'all were talking earlier about with Isaac and what Yahweh said to about sacrificing Isaac or whatever. If supposedly the sacrifices were added in, and which I'm kind of like you, I think they probably were, then how does that story fit in? Why would he ask him to sacrifice his son if sacrifices weren't even around? That to me doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm not questioning that it happened. I'm just questioning it doesn't seem to fit his character. It doesn't fit Yahweh's character to do something like that. Now, Christians in the past in church, I heard, well, that was a prophecy for Jesus, him being his only son, this, that, and the other. I'm like, yeah, I don't see it like that.
Yeah.
It just seems to me it was added in to maybe down the road allow the sacrifices to be accepted, if you want to put it that way. I don't know. We've just questioned that. It just doesn't make sense why he would ask him to do that.
Well, first of all, I hear you. I mean, that particular text. Well, first of all, let me say this. I do think that the ancient world was very, very much involved in sacrifices. That the Hebrew people also very much involved in sacrifices. Egyptian, if you look at all the ancient Near East and the ancient world, you're going to find that is one of the main things about it's how this is what people felt, is that, and we know this from all sorts of cultures, like you take the young virgin and toss her to the volcano god, and or you take your best looking sheep and you kill it, and somehow we hope maybe that is a way to appease the god or the gods, as the case might be. How is it that we can draw near to God? I mean, that's in fact one of our sacrifices in the Hebrew Bible is a korban. How do you draw near? So first of all, I just make sure people understand that I know and believe that sacrifices were a major part of the ancient world. My question becomes, is it anachronistically applied to some of like when the children of Israel left Egypt, could it be that this revolutionary religion, this revolutionary faith was different in some ways than the other? Like, for instance, if I used to think that male circumcision was something that the Israelites did, and nobody else did it. I think, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? So I thought all these other men were uncircumcised, and it was only the Hebrews and good Baptist boys that were circumcised. What I later found out is, no, the ancient people all over the place, they're doing that. We have drawings, little dirty drawings of, not that it's dirty, but explicit drawings on tombs and priestly buildings in ancient Egypt where they're doing the circumcision. What I'm wondering is, how much of what we read about in the biblical text is something which has maybe taken on a Hebrew twist, but something that's been changed in the text, and maybe it wasn't, ordered by God. We certainly have text, for instance, in Jeremiah 7:21 through 26, where it says, "Hey, you're not supposed to do this. I didn't tell you about sacrifices when I brought you out." So that's the first point I would make, is that it's not that I don't think sacrifices take place. It's that I think that we have other texts in the Bible where God says, "Look, it never enters my mind to do human sacrifice. It's never entered my, except for that one time."
Right.
And then we also have in Genesis 18. Genesis 18 is very problematic textually. What do I mean by that? We have 5 places in Genesis 18 alone where the text has been changed, and admittedly changed according to some of the Masoretic notes. And that is for a whole host of reasons. Generally, they're referred to as tikkun, the Sopharim, the changes of the Sopharim, the scribes. So what I'm curious about is that text, Genesis 18, and I love it, it's part of my Bible, but there are things about it that make me say, is that something that would make the cut if you said, I only want to see, what God commanded or whatever? Look, we've got in the biblical text, we have stories, we have prose, we have poetry, we have some myth. I think we have some borrowings from other ancient cultures. Like, I'm right now in the midst of reading a lot of what I would call the Bible of Baal. I'm reading ancient Canaanite myths and looking at some of that. And I told Tabor the other day, we were talking, I said, look, some of this stuff is stupid, but I said, honestly, some of the stuff is quite moving. Now, I know people are going to gasp, but I'll give you an example. Some of that which is quite moving, we know, at least some scholars propose, and I buy it, that earlier version of a Canaanite text was changed, and I won't go into all this right now, but the name Baal, it's like they just scratch it out and write Jehovah or Elohim on it, repackage it, and put it to a new purpose in a new book, plagiarized. So we have examples of that.
Yeah.
We have some people that propose that some of the text, like, we know, this is not a guess, this isn't some scholarly made up thing. We know that the god of Canaan, the chief deity of Canaan, was called El. And that name became associated with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So these are things that we are learning, that we know, and people don't have to agree with it. But if we find these things archaeologically, textually, we have to at least consider. And so when I look at the biblical text and I'm looking for what is the earliest strata of that text, look, I have heard some of the popular rabbis who are friends of mine who like to make fun of Christianity, and they say things like, well, this text doesn't agree with this text. Look, the gospel writers are clearly not telling the truth here. They're, and I get into that years ago, and I thought, man, that's, whoa, what do I do about this? And then I find that the same criticism can be levied against the Hebrew Bible in certain cases. So I'm like, well, let's be fair. Let's think about this. Some people say, well, the New Testament wasn't written for hundreds of years after these events, so how reliable is that? I said, really? You want to talk about that? How about the Hebrew Bible? The oldest copy of the complete Hebrew Bible is dated to 1008 of the Common Era.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, you see, so there are some things which, so I want to look back. I want to say, what's the earliest example? If I'm studying Genesis 18, I want to say, well, let me look at the Septuagint. What does it say? What are the textual variants there? What about the Samaritan Pentateuch? Do we have Genesis 18 in the Dead Sea Scrolls where I can compare? You know, what are the things there? So we're on the same page, Todd. There are things I don't know, but I'm certainly interested in how is that text to be understood. I'll give you one more example. Some say that Genesis 18 and that God said, these would believe this happened as it says, that God says, sacrifice your son, because in that time and in certain cultures in the ancient world, that was acceptable. And so it didn't even shock Abram. And then, so he goes to do this, and he stopped, and some have proposed that stopping is to say, okay, now let me tell you how we do it here. You know, to show this person who follows God, Abram, that we don't do that here. So who knows? I mean, some of this we're stuck with what do we know for sure? What do we feel? You know, I talk to a lot of people and say, well, let me tell you what I feel that text is saying. I'm all about feeling text. I feel text all the time. There are times where I fall asleep holding my Bible, feeling the Bible. You know, I love this book. But beyond the touchy-feely stuff, what I want to know is, what does it say, and what does it mean, and what did it mean in that ancient culture? And if you could put yourself in the world of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and look around and say, how do I understand this text in that day, in that language, in that culture? It's a little bit of difficulty, because a lot of times our feely, touchy stuff is based on, you know, our current way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like one more, see, I'm on a roll, and I got to be quiet and let other people talk. But one more thing that hits me is, I remember the first time I read the story of the angels, or Malachim, visiting Lot. And, you know, the angels are there, and Lot's like, oh, don't take them. Here, take my daughter. What? You know, and the way people explain that is they go, oh, that's the ancient culture. You know, you have your guests now. Well, I don't like that ancient culture. If that's true, let the angels defend themselves. And they were capable of it, right? They blinded the people that were attacking them. But I'm not going to give my daughter, and I'm not going to defend that as the right thing to do. That was dumb. It was absolutely crazy. And I know that might upset some people to hear that, but hear it again. That was dumb, you know? So anyway, if I did
one more thing that I wanted to say, because we talked about this a little bit. This is on a lighter note, but the introduction you had to the class where you're counting everything down is really cool to watch. But like I was joking with her one day, if somebody was on a bad acid trip, they'd be in big trouble watching that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we can actually change that. They have a few of them, but I just assumed that a lot of y'all weren't on acid. But you're right. That's.
I think it's cool looking. I mean,
no, it is. It is weird, and YouTube has about 12 of them, and we could mix it up. So we might do that. Maybe we'll even do it. Like 5 minutes is a long time. The only reason we do anything there, have you ever logged in to somebody and they go, all right, we're gonna wait a few minutes for more people to get here, and you know, and you're like, I mean, I'm an old Army guy. If you start at 10:30, at 10:30 you go, good morning, here we go.
Yeah.
So we kind of do that as an intro, give people a few minutes, but I might change it up just so you see we can do something other than the acid trip.
I kind of like it.
I hear you. Well, we might change it up and let people vote and see which one you like. Like I said, there's a few of them, so
there you go.
swap things up a little bit.
All right, take
All
care.
right. All right. Y'all too. Shabbat shalom. Tom.
Yeah, hi. I haven't done acids since I had a bad trip when I was 17. So
Good.
I stay
Good. You learn.
I started very young,
All right.
down the wrong path. But I just have to say a couple things about Abraham because Karen brought up a good point, and I think my wife might agree with Karen. But it would
Wait.
Well,
Then
leads
you're
me to,
outnumbered. You're outnumbered then. So go
I think
forward
they got a
with
show like
caution.
that on Fox, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, what makes Abraham special then? What made Abraham special? And did God, like, okay, if God came to me and was standing in front of me talking to me, I'd do what he said, right? So am I to read the Bible and believe that God was, when he's in Jehovah's, and God was said this, that God was actually standing there talking to Abraham? Is that the way I'm supposed to read the Bible? I know maybe back when I was younger I did, but today I don't. That's not. I don't believe that. I think we have to perceive God. We can't see God. Even the man from Galilee says that you can't see God. Moses says, they didn't see anything. So when the text says God said to Noah, and the text says God said to Abraham, and was God, what was God standing in the creator of the universe was standing in front of them talking to them? Really? I don't read it that way anymore. I can't read it that way. Do you read it that way? I'm just curious.
No.
Okay, so what?
But let me see. You said what set? First question is what made Abraham different? What if our one thing I love in the Abrahamic cycle of stories is that he intercedes on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah according to the narrative. He says, you know the story. What if there are this many? What about this many? What about this many? But the thing that's striking, above all, for me, in the Abraham story, people say, oh, he's obedient, he did this, he did that, is that he challenged God. Now, what do I mean by that? He said, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? What? You mean to tell me that a God is going to burn up this wicked place, Sodom and Gomorrah? The end of this flesh has come before me, and he's going. The fact that Abram says, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? That is such. When I read that, I go, wow. Well, let me give you another example. There's something here. There's something here about this challenging God that seems to stick its head up in the text. Israel. What does Israel do? Israel is one who strove with God and with men and prevailed. Now, I think men today, and this is just a blanket statement, not you guys that are here, but I find that people, let me just say people, lack courage, lack the fortitude, the strength to stand up in the face of things that don't feel right. And let me tell you, the hardest place to do that is in religion. The hardest place to stand up and say, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it, is in a church, is in a synagogue, is in a mosque. And what we tend to do is we tend to want to follow the dictates of a religious leader or a synod or a church edict or what I encourage people to do is say, if we really dig deep and we're courageous, can we not say, shall not the judge of all the earth do judge? Those are the people who seemingly are used as examples. I mean, I don't know.
Moshe,
so when I talk about Genesis 18, please don't look again. I have not torn a single page out of my Bible, and I haven't crossed anything out. And I'm not the kind of person who picks and chooses and just thinks the things that I like are what God really said. It's a very structured approach. It's a reasoning, a struggle. You know, I remember years ago, I wrote in one of my Bibles, I wrote Naphtali because I had learned that the name had something to do with my struggle, my wrestling. And for me, I had identified, this is in the 90s, I had identified that I thought this was just going to be easy. I was just going to be a good Christian. I might even be a minister, a Christian minister. I thought that's what I was going to do. But God took me in a different direction. I say that. My reading certainly took me in a different direction. So, but I feel like this group is very strong, very courageous, and willing to challenge some of those things. And we don't have to agree on everything. That would be boring.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I didn't mean to derail that, Tom. I
just so when he was discussing, 30 people, 20, how many, righteous, who was he talking to? Was that just
we have to wonder.
His mind? Was he just going on in his mind, or was he talking to somebody maybe who was speaking for God?
The Bible, as you know, gives both answers.
Yeah,
it depends. I mean, it's like what was the voice that young Samuel heard? He thought it was his teacher. He went. He just heard a voice, but it says the voice of the Lord was rare in those days. We have some texts which say, and no one has seen God. God says, you can't see me. You can only, Moses, I'm going to let you see my backside, but no one can see my face. And then it says, and Moses spoke face to face with God as a man speaks to his neighbor. And so people say, well, what that really means, so we're getting into a world where the answers are sometimes multiplous. We have more than one answer. In Exodus chapter 24, it says, and they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet was sapphire, and they ate. They saw the God of Israel, and they ate. Deuteronomy, Moses says, listen here, you didn't see nothing. You didn't see nothing. You heard a voice, and you would expect a hand to go up and say, Moses, sorry, I don't want to be problematic here. I don't want to stir up anything. I don't want to cause a fight. But we did see God. No, you didn't see God. Now, the answer to that, most fundamentalists say, well, there's got to be an answer. And I say, yeah, there's an answer. You have different stories. And somebody goes, no, that's not the answer. You mean it's not the answer? Because that answer challenges traditionalism. You see, traditionalism says there are no differences. La, 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 la. I see no differences. I hear no differences. I don't care what Ross says. I don't care. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. I said, but look, here they are. Look, this account says this. This account says this. Nope, you're not reading it right. I think I think that the answer is that some texts say that people saw God. And some texts say, no, you don't see God. And that is the biggest, and it's not just that, that's just one example. But when people try to reconcile all of those things, it's not like you're saying tomato and tomato. There are clear textual differences, and those are because we have different sources with different ideas of God. Some of those texts refer to God very anthropomorphically.
I actually have a way of reconciling them, and it also challenges traditionalism, and I would use as you were speaking, I found myself thinking of Judges chapter 13, Manoah's parents.
Yeah,
and they thought they saw God, right? Oh, we saw God. Right? You're familiar with this account, I assume, right?
Oh, yeah. The Malak.
So what did they actually see?
Yeah.
Who was that they were speaking with?
Pele.
Who?
Pele.
What?
That's his name, Pele. They asked
Oh,
after his
Pele,
name.
right, exactly. My name is wonderful. It's hidden, right? Yeah. Who exactly were they speaking to?
Yeah. Well,
I got a theory. I have a theory, and I'm not ready to express it because you got. I need to build up more credibility.
No, that's fine. Yeah, but look, all those things that you want to share, as you're ready to share them, or you feel ready, or you want to share them, or whatever, this is the place to share it, and just do it. You may want to do it on the Discord.
No, I'll just say it. I'll just say it. I believe Joseph was resurrected. I believe Joseph was resurrected. Yeah, that's who Moses spoke with, mouth to mouth. Yeah, and that he was the messenger of God.
Well, you're going to definitely have to show me that from the text, but not today.
Oh, it's not in the text. That's just it.
Yeah.
There's just a ton of circumstantial evidence.
I got you. No, but I tell you, and I am all about different people have different views, and a lot of those views, as you said, and I don't know if you meant it this way, but a lot of times people do have views that are not based on the text, and that can come in different ways. Some people say, well, the Lord told me that, or that. All of those kind of things are not my field. I just tell people, look, that's fine. Who am I to question that? What I do, though, is I keep people in the text to express my views. But again, I have people all the time tell me, well, you won't find this in the biblical text, but God told me that. Or, those kind of situations, it's just different. It's a different approach for me. I just don't feel as comfortable that way. But it sounds like it would make for a good book, though.
The stone the builders rejected. The builders were his brothers.
Psalm 118.
The stone the builders rejected. The builders were his brothers. Threw him in a pit. Through his suffering, many were saved.
I heard your bird yell amen.
Yeah. Yeah, he gets mad every time I mention it. I'm supposed to keep it quiet. Anyway, okay.
Hey, have a beautiful day. Shabbat Shalom. Everyone have a wonderful time. Thanks for your patience and endurance and sticking with us all this time. And let's see, so Monday night, members of the Yachad who want to begin a study of biblical Hebrew, we're going to start that. We're going to go through together, God willing. It's on my schedule. We're going to at least have an introductory conversation with the textbook, talking a little bit about how this thing is going to work and so forth. Anybody who's part of the Yachad can join, and so that's going to be fun. And you've got time. So if you say, well, I didn't get the book, well, this first Monday, not tomorrow is Sunday. Monday, we're going to come together and we'll talk about it. So if you hadn't got the book yet, you got time. You can join us if you're part of the Yachad. All of those links are in the either in the newsletter or on the Discord, or you can email me or whatever, Facebook message. But I encourage you to join if you want to study biblical Hebrew. And then I think the next thing I have that's going to be public is Thursday with Jono. And so you're welcome to join us for that. And then otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday. And one more thing, Father's Day is tomorrow. If you are a father, happy Father's Day. I also know that it's not always a happy time for people who've lost children, people who always wanted to have children and couldn't have children, people who have children who've lost their father. Please know that my prayers are with you. People who have relationships with their father that's not good. Fathers who have not been good fathers. Look, it goes on and on. I know that it's not as easy as a Hallmark card. So I used to put out big messages, but I think about all of those different scenarios. So if you fit into any category and you're forced to think about fathers tomorrow, then please know that my prayers are with you, that we all make it through the day. If you've lost someone or whatever, use the time to think the happiest memories you can think about, and I will see you next week. How about that? God bless you. Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov.